Hello and welcome to this introductory video outlining the English Literature A-Level course that's offered at Old Swinford Hospital Sixth Form. If you have any questions following this, you can get in touch with the subject leader, Miss Kempf, or you can get in touch with myself and we'll be able to get back to you. This talk should probably last about 15 to 20 minutes. If you have any questions following that, like I say, drop us an email, but for the remainder of the time before the next video begins, what we'd suggest that you do is that you have a look at some of the material that's been presented here and you have a look at the specification on the OCR website. So as I've just mentioned, this is the OCR specification that we follow. It comprises of 3 different units, and what you should perhaps do is go onto the OCR website, have a look at the specification, print off a copy, make sure that you've got it ready as part of your folders for September. So component 1 is a 2.5 hour exam that you look at, and as part of that you'll look at 3 different texts. So the first is your Shakespeare study, and the Shakespeare study will be Hamlet. So it would be a good idea for you, if you haven't already, have a look at some productions of Hamlet, have a look at some, if you can get a copy of it as well so that you can read along through. That would be particularly useful. If you've watched The Lion King, because obviously that's based on Hamlet, that isn't sufficient. You need to make sure that you get the actual copy. Your drama and poetry pre-1900, you'll look at Geoffrey Chaucer's The Merchant's Prologue and The Merchant's Tale. That's a 14th century text, so he was writing after the events of the Black Death, at the time of Richard II. And you'll look at Oliver Goldsmith's She Stoops to Conquer, which is a play from the 18th century. It's probably the only 18th century play that's really maintained its popularity. It's a time period of plays where there isn't necessarily too many. So those are the texts that you'll be looking at. And if you want to get ahead and if you want to start reading up on them, that might be a useful exercise. Component 2 is also 2.5 hours long, but this is on, it's a comparative and it's a contextual study. So the topic that you'll be looking at, or the theme you'll be looking at, is dystopia. So what you'll have is you'll have a close reading of a dystopian text as part of task 1, and then task 2 you'll have a comparative essay. So that will be looking at The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood and George Orwell's 1984. Both of those books, you can have a look at some adaptations of that. So Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale has been made into a Hulu TV series recently, starring Elizabeth Moss. Recommend having a look at that. You can get quite a few of them on 4OD, and actually it goes on past the events of Margaret Atwood's first book. A sequel's just been published as well, so you can read that. George Orwell's 1984, there's some excellent radio adaptations of that. There is a film as well that you can watch. And again, maybe having a bit of a focus on this topic of dystopia prior to September would be useful for you. Component 3 is literature post-1900. So you'll be looking at 3 texts, a play, prose and poetry. So you'll be looking at Carol Ann Duffy's Rapture, Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire, and Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea, which is a feminist response to Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. It would again be useful for you to have a bit of an understanding about each of the texts, but you'll be looking at most of these in Year 13, so it's not an instant priority for you. The department is led by Miss Kempf, and if you've got any questions from this, you can contact her. But next year you'll be taught by Miss Kempf and Mr. Eastwood. It's a big department, the English department. They're all based in the Folian Centre, and if you have any questions about your particular work or anything that you're a bit unsure about, obviously you can go see your subject teachers, but because there's so many different members of staff, you can contact them as well. You've got support from dedicated subject specialists and examiners. So Miss Kempf is an examiner for the OCR board. It would be useful to make sure that you get her insight about how different questions are assessed. There's a 100% pass rate in the subject with a proven record of students achieving A's and A stars, and because they're all based in the Folian Centre, the department is able to utilise the drama space that's available, the multimedia suites of computers that are there, and the department takes advantage of our close proximity to a number of different theatres and base in Birmingham to have theatre trips and lecture days as well to support the learning. To study English literature at A level, you need to meet the school's minimum entry requirements, which is 7 pass grades, and you also need to make sure that you get a grade 6 in your English literature and in your English language, so you need a grade 6 in both. And those desirable traits that we're really looking for is you must enjoy reading beyond the curriculum, you must enjoy reading for pleasure. That's part and parcel of the entire course. You have to have confidence in writing extended essays because that's how it's assessed at A level, and you should have a passion for creative writing as well and creating your own texts. English literature was listed a few years ago as being what's called a facilitating subject. So that's a subject that universities look at as being particularly desirable. It's not necessarily something that they're particularly hot on now after 2019, but what it does show is that actually English literature is not necessarily the content that universities are really looking for, it's the skills. And those skill sets that you get from English literature I've listed on the right of the screen, and you can have a read through them, but those are the things that institutions and employers are really after from the students. So they're not necessarily wanting you to know everything about Hamlet, it's about critical thinking, making inferences, evaluating. Those are the things that are really going to set you apart if you do the English literature course. English literature is also advantageous if you're looking to go for competitive entries, because it will teach you about critical thinking. It will encourage you into debate in the class. And for things like medicine, when you're doing MMI interviews, so small interviews with different people when you're applying for medical school, that can be really helpful. So some students have combined biology, chemistry and English in the past, and that means that they've got all of those wider skill sets that medical schools are looking for. Likewise, if you're looking to go to law, English literature is a really useful course to choose. So over the summer, we would ask that you complete the essential bridging tasks, and if you're really serious about your A-level studies, we would also expect you to consolidate your GCSE work, broaden your subject horizons, and get used to some of the A-level content for the English course. So over the summer, you should continue with your GCSE English language work. The reason why I'm saying language very specifically there is it's important that you have the tools that will equip you to study English literature at A level. And obviously you can look back over your English literature materials as well, that's a given, but don't neglect the English language side as well. You're also encouraged to read one of the suggested texts, or at least watch some of the adaptations that have been produced of the text that you're going to be studying at A level. To broaden your subject horizons, there's been a lot of problems in lockdown, obviously, but there have been some aspects that have really been quite surprising and have been really helpful to a lot of people. And the National Theatre, for example, at a time when they had the revenue was going to be really hit by the fact that they couldn't put on performances, what they did is they decided that every Thursday they would release on YouTube a full-length play from their repertoire. Now, what we would encourage you to do at the same time is to make a donation to support the arts, and you can do that using the links on the YouTube account. But watching a play every single week is really helpful, because you'll start to just become accustomed to the language that's used, the dramatic devices that are used as well. There's an excellent podcast called Away with Words, which is a podcast that explores language and how it's used through a variety of different aspects of society. So within families, throughout history, in different cultures, it would be a good podcast to subscribe to. We'd also like you for English to get used to the A-level content, and Miss Kaempf has created a number of different resources that should have been emailed out to you already, but if you haven't got a copy, or if you'd like to see what else there is available, you can email her and she'll give you some example lessons that you can start working through. There's a really good lesson, for example, that you can do remotely that she's made, which is on that topic of dystopia, which is component 2 of the OCR A-level. The essential tasks that you need to complete for September are the bridging tasks that are set. Now, for English literature, what Miss Kaempf would like you to do is to answer the 13 questions that are in that middle task. And actually, they're questions that have been set by the OCR board, and they are seen as being excellent ways to help prepare you for component 2, which you'll be looking at in September. So we want you to complete that, and we want you to choose 2 of the other 3 options that are on that list. So either you can create your own glossary of literary terms and add examples from literary texts. You could select and read a Shakespearean text, one of which you didn't study at GCSE, so not one of the options that you had there. You can choose Hamlet, because obviously that is something that you're doing at A level. And finally, you can select a poem of your choice, one you didn't study as part of your GCSE, read, annotate, create a PowerPoint that you would then use to explain to people about what this poem essentially showcases, what themes are being explored, what devices are being used. But the main thing that you need to do is to answer those 13 questions. You'll be looking at them with Miss Kaempf when you join in September. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've got any questions, you can contact Miss Kaempf or myself and we'll get back to you. And we'd suggest that before you go on to the next video at the allotted time, that you spend a bit of time looking at some of the things that have been mentioned here. So the OCR specification, making sure you've got a copy of that, making a note of all the books that potentially you might want to invest in prior to September, or looking at adaptations on YouTube, for example.